Nigel Farage. I was told by an MEP that what would happen is Farage would catch the Eurostar over to Brussels. He would literally only be there for about an hour. As the leader of a group within the European Parliament, he was able to ask a question once a week. So he'd turn up, ask his question, which had nothing to do with the debate. It was just him grandstanding.
He had the charisma of a damp rag and the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk. And the question that I want to ask, that we're all going to ask is, who are you? I'd never heard of you. Nobody in Europe had ever heard of you.
He was really good at creating this kind of like viral sound bites. And then RT would clip that, put it into its YouTube viral engine, and that was how Nigel Farage gained a global audience.
The Russia conspiracy never, ever ends. But I think today we have reached new lows. Chris Bryant, paranoid EU rejoiner, has stood up in the House of Commons today and made the most outrageous statement. It is a complete and utter lie. He is a total liar. He says that in 2018, I received over £500,000 from Russia Today. Mr. Bryant, in 2018, I did not receive a penny from Russia Today. In previous years, I'd done a couple of bits for them. I decided it wasn't suitable for me. Interestingly, you've appeared on Russia Today. I wonder how much you got paid. You see, the whole thing is ridiculous. You are an outright liar. Say that outside of the House of Commons. I'd like you to. I could do with a new car, maybe even a new house. But of course, you won't do that. You've said this on the basis of no evidence. I did do media work in 2018. I worked as a contributor for Fox News. I presented a program on LBC. I did many, many other things, but I did not receive a penny, not one penny, in 2018 from Russia Today. Can we please end the lies, the nonsense, the Russia conspiracy? They had nothing to do with Brexit whatsoever.
Why did Farage have to lie about meeting the Russian ambassador, Alexander Yakovenko, when in actual fact he most definitely did, and the evidence proves it? Presumably, Liz Jones never attended the Russian embassy either, or the ambassador's private residence to represent UKIP and broker deals on their behalf. Sorry, broker meeting on their behalf. Same thing, isn't it? Meeting, deal is a meeting. Synonymous. What does Farage have to say that? Well, he refuses to comment on it, and we have to ask why that is. Oh, I can confirm for a fact that Liz Jones most definitely did attend the Russian embassy. And here she's pictured with the alleged master spy, Sergey Nalobin, no less. In the next frame, of course, we see Sergey Nalobin, master spy so-called, with Boris Johnson, who notoriously called President Putin at the weekend a fucking idiot. I very much think Putin made him look a fucking idiot, quite frankly. So was the Conservative Friends of Russia organization a spy operation? The Westminster spy ring, as Carole Cadwalladr and Peter Jukes put it, with Sergei Christo. Well, in actual fact, it wasn't just about spying. That was part of it, obviously. It was primarily about forging much stronger trade links, which is what the Russians wanted. They wanted to pump their cheap Russian gas into the whole of Europe and make vast sums of money out of it. But of course, the war hawks in Washington ultimately had different ideas, and so now Europe is totally dependent on American liquefied natural gas, which is far more expensive. Europe lost in every single way. Was Sergey Nalobin the master spy alleged by Sergei Christo, Peter Jukes and Carole Cadwalladr? Well, when he contacted me in April 2015, I automatically presumed that he was a Russian spy, that he was FSB, more to the point. Did that bother me? Well, no, not in the slightest, in actual fact. Why would it bother me? You know, every nation has spies, and every nation conducts espionage and counter-espionage operations. Russia is no different than any other nation. In fact, its espionage operations are, I would say, significantly smaller and less dangerous than the United States, which is a toxic nation, quite frankly. Well, the US administration certainly is. conducting information operations and regime change operations across the world. So, you can only put Russia in the same context. In actual fact, the United States is far more dangerous and far more toxic to the United Kingdom, in all honesty, although the myth of the special relationship continues. So, was Sergei a master spy? Well, I never once looked on Sergei as a master spy. Absolutely not. He was very efficient, very good at what he did, very professional in many ways, in actual fact. And he built a very successful operation here in the UK, which they now call the Westminster spy ring. But the vast majority of the people in said spy ring were not spies. They didn't know they were spies at all, in actual fact. And they had no formal training in espionage or counter-espionage. So calling it a spy ring, far more dangerous in actual fact, apparently, than the Oxbridge spy ring, is something of a misnomer, in my opinion, and particularly Sergei being a master spy. So I'll recount an example at the Imperial War Museum on the 9th of May 2015, when his boss, his master, Alexander Kramarenko, a fascinating man, extra-plenipotentiary diplomat, approached me to offer me political asylum in the Russian Federation. Well, Sergey Nalobin, the so-called master spy, actually jumped back in awe and fear, quite frankly. Would a master spy do such a thing? No, not at all. But he would in the presence of the real master spy. And that was my perception of the events that day. And also later at another reception at the Russian ambassador's private residence, I gained exactly the same impression there. Mr. Kramarenko wielded enormous power, very subtle, almost unseen, until, of course, you study the body language. And it's the body language, the mannerisms, the gesticulations, the nervousness, the fear. That alone dictates who's running the show. And I got the impression very clearly, in actual fact, that Mr. Kramarenko was running the show. And even Ambassador Yakovenko seemed very deferential in his presence. So yes, absolutely, Kramarenko was the master there, not Sergey Nalobin. He was his man about town, his Mr. Fixer. He was very good at it as well, in actual fact, until he was expelled. But master spy? No, absolutely not. I mean, that is just a bridge too far, quite frankly. Although I understand why they use this terminology. It's to sex it up, basically, to make it sound far more intriguing and exciting than it actually was. And it was very exciting, very intriguing, no doubt. But Sergei Nalobin, the master spy, well, he was also expelled from Estonia, so he's not much of a master spy, is he? So, was Nigel Farage caught up in the Westminster spy ring, so-called? Or more to the point, a Russian information operation targeting Britain and all European nations? Well, there's absolutely no doubt that Liz Jones, the UKIP solicitor, represented Farage and Aaron Banks at the Russian embassy. I witnessed it with my own eyes. Anna Sabatin, the Foreign Office, was also there. And obviously, she asked me a number of questions about it afterwards. And I gave her my very frank and honest assessment on who was what and what they were doing. So was Farage caught up in that information operation with RT News? Yeah, most definitely was. Absolutely no doubt about it. But he didn't receive over £500,000 in 2018 from RT News. He confesses, for want of a better description, to receiving a total of £5,000 from RT News for all of his appearances. Well, that's not credible either. I don't believe that for 1 minute. However, we've not seen any audited accounts to the effect. So the jury's out on that. But what we do know is that Nigel Farage, Tommy Robinson, and Paul Golding were all used. They were centrifugal in the UK arm of the Russian information operation. And yes, it most definitely did exist. They can deny it all they want, but the evidence against them is absolutely damning. Well, welcome to Hyde Park, with the private residence of the Russian ambassador in the shop behind me.
I would imagine it's quite heavily fortified now, since the official invasion of Ukraine, that is. So I attended a gathering there on the 12th of June 2015 to be nominated for a Free Speech Award. And of course that led me into the underground, perhaps more than anything else in actual fact. Well, what can I say? What is done is done. It can't be undone. I was never expecting to be nominated in the way that I was, but I accepted the nomination and I was happy with it in actual fact. I was also nominated by Leo Deer for a free speech nomination the same year for services to freedom of expression, for having sacrificed my liberty in defence of freedom of speech. But there were some very interesting people at the embassy, obviously, ambassadors' private residence, I should say. One of which was Elizabeth Jones, the UKIP solicitor, the perpetual fawner and groveller around Ambassador Yakovenko. And of course, there were people there paying very close attention to what Elizabeth was up to. And so one of the reasons for making this video these years later is not just the video for the Underground, the Hunted series. It's also to draw attention to what happened that day. All I can say is that I witnessed Elizabeth Jones glued to the side of Ambassador Yakovenko for a good 50 minutes in the garden of the private residence. I didn't hear what they were saying, obviously, but I was told later that UKIP was trying to secure Russian funding. And whether that was actually obtained or not is a matter that came before investigation with the National Crime Agency and also the Electoral Commission. But one Boris Johnson cancelled both of those investigations, according to the well-educated, well-informed rumour mill in Westminster and Whitehall. Why would he do that, I wonder? Well, I guess there's a very good reason. Mr. Farage recently admitted that he'd done a number of favours for the Tories, and he seemed to be quite peeved that he was being repaid in a way that they did recently by saying, oh no, we would never allow him to join the Conservative Party. Well, that's hardly surprising. It's now become Liberal left, and Farage is only one hair's breadth away from them as a centre-right Ziocentrist, quite frankly. So the whole issue is, should the investigation, i.e. a reinvestigation, be made? Should that investigation, the original investigation, be reopened into Russian funding of UKIP, if indeed it did occur? Well, we know that Mr. Farage has in actual fact denied meeting Ambassador Yakovenko, which is quite embarrassing for him because obviously we know for a fact that he did meet Ambassador Yakovenko, and there is a photograph to prove that. He's been outed well and truly on that one. So Farage has got form, like all politicians, for being an incurable liar. What's new? Nothing, one might ask. But what is new is the possibility that UKIP did receive funding from the Russian Federation. I'm not saying it did, I'm not saying it didn't. But what I am saying very clearly is they most definitely did seek to secure Russian funding, particularly on that day. And Elizabeth Jones brokered those meetings at said residence on said date. And later, Aaron Banks met the Ambassador Yakovenko several times. He denied that also. He said it was only one meeting. He obviously later amended that and said, oh no, it was 3 meetings. So for all we know, it could have been 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, etc. Who knows? But what we do know is that Aaron Banks has also lied about it. Nigel Farage has also lied about it. And when Starmer came to power, obviously an article appeared in the press confirming that the investigation was likely to be reopened. I think that's a good idea. It should be. in actual fact, as we need to find out exactly where Aaron Banks obtained that money. And of course, Farage as well. And if UKIP was funded by the Russian Federation, that of course brings into serious doubt their eligibility to continue as a political party now, and also what role that funding may or may not have played in the EU ref. I mean, I actually campaigned for vote leave, you know, and I was also the CEO of Stronger Out. So before the deluded groupies crank up with their, oh, you're a Remainer or a rejoiner. No, I most definitely am not a rejoiner, and I was not a Remainer either. I campaigned for Brexit from before it was even called Brexit. In actual fact, I became a nationalist in 1989. And one of the things that lured me into nationalism was the campaign against the EEC, which later became the European Union. I was campaigning to get Britain out of the EU before Nigel Farage had even joined an organisation called UKIP, because it hadn't even been formed. What I say is this: if Russian funding was given to UKIP, then of course that is a very serious matter. It should be investigated fully and the appropriate resolve enforced. If they didn't get any funding, well then they were telling the truth, weren't they? Must be the first time ever, obviously. But I can recount quite clearly what I saw that day, and I have all the evidence to prove that I was there, including a transcript with a Foreign Office civil servant who effectively debriefed me afterwards. So let's see where the investigation goes. And all I would say is to Mr. Farage in particular is stop lying about meeting Ambassador Yakovenko. That in itself throws a cloud of suspicion over the entire miasma of deceit and trickery and smoke and mirrors in this situation. It simply heaps further suspicion upon him. So let's see where the investigation goes. But for my own part, I will continue to speak the truth, and I don't care about the lies, smears and threats and abuse of fake Farage and his groupies. They can spout it all they want. They just make it even easier for Starmer to crack down on them, because they're not capable of using social media responsibly, are they? We've seen that repeatedly. The truth will out.
So, as I said previously, we can't just blame everything on Nigel Farage. There's also the other grandiose narcissist, Tommy Robinson. They're currently having a bit of a spat at this moment in time. The centre-right seems to have gone into meltdown over who has the biggest ego. But anyway, or more to the point, an argument between two liars, which liar to believe. But that said, Tommy Robinson was also involved in the Russian information operation. And yeah, well, he was promoted repeatedly on RT News, and obviously benefited greatly from the YouTube algorithm, which pushed him out to an international audience in exactly the same way as it did Nigel Farage. Although prior to that, Farage was in actual fact made a household name by Rupert Murdoch, News International, that organised criminal gang. But getting back to the other convicted criminal, Tommy Robinson. Well, obviously, Tommy launched his rape of Britain in Russia, and was feted and wined and dined, as it were. I have no idea if he took any cocaine, of course. I mean, who knows, quite frankly, on that score. But the simple truth is, you know, Tommy was pushed and promoted by the Russian information operation, and he knew exactly what he was doing, in the same way as his close friend Paul Golding, who, according to Nick Lowles, introduced him to the fine art of stashing grifting proceeds in Russian bank accounts. Well, we're waiting for the evidence on that one, but Sergei Nalobin obviously has ordered an investigation, namely MI5, to determine exactly where Tommy Robinson gets his money from, and if any of it has been stashed in Russian bank accounts. But yes, Tommy, most definitely. Another centrifugal role in the Russian information operation, although not quite as significant as Farage to begin with. Another reason why their egos are in such a clash at this moment in time. And then, of course, we have one Paul Golding, or Goldigger Golding, as he's named commonly, another grifter, who went to Moscow to promote the Russian information operation. And in one TV appearance, apparently, over 50 million Russians actually watched that interview. Of course, the opening ambit was Brexit, which seems to be a favourite issue of the Russian Federation, doesn't it? Or the Kremlin, more to the point.
They hope to topple the legitimate government of Russia to ensure that European nations cannot turn to your country for help in the years to come. To achieve this, they subject Russia and President Putin to an avalanche of lies, distortions and economic pressure to turn Western populations against Russia, which is our natural ally. The propaganda war against President Putin and Russia is the same diabolical pressure that our movement, Britain First, and many others have been subjected to. Smear campaigns, character assassination, false criminal charges, media lies and poison. These are the weapons the globalists use against our sacred and noble cause.
Thank you very much for coming, for giving us this chance to ask you some questions.
You're welcome.
And my first one is about Brexit. Actually, the whole world looks at it and thinks, what is going on?
Mm-hmm. You're not alone in that, because a lot of British people are very confused and frustrated by the process as well. But essentially, we had a referendum. It was the biggest democratic vote in British history, and we voted to leave the EU. Shortly after that, we held a general election, and every single major party stood on a platform of honouring the referendum result. Then we held a European election for the European Parliament, and the Brexit Party came out of nowhere and won the election. So we've had three separate democratic exercises that have all confirmed the British people want to leave the EU.
So is it accurate to call the Russian information operation the Westminster spy ring? Well, some spies were involved in the information operation. Yes, of course, no doubt about that. But one ludicrous claim that Russia has 75,000 agents here in Britain is just absolutely laughable. It's just, I don't know. Perhaps some people are taking magic mushrooms, quite frankly. It's just nonsense. But a Westminster spy ring, well, it all sounds very sexy, doesn't it? Spies under the bed everywhere, or Reds under the bed. Well, they're not Reds anymore, are they? Or are they? Goodness knows. It all depends what narrative they want to push on any particular day. In actual fact, all governments do this. They all have their own narrative that they want the mass majority to believe. I guess you could say that Peter Jukes and Carole Cadwalladr are pushing their own narrative, in actual fact, their own information operation. They're both Remainers, obviously, so they do have an axe to grind in that way. But that alone doesn't mean that nothing they say can be taken seriously, particularly about Farage. I mean, Farage always uses this riposte. Oh, they're Remainers. Nothing they can say can be taken seriously. Yeah, of course, I got money off Russia, jokingly. Well, yes, of course. Yes, he did get money off Russia today, and definitely more than £5,000. That much we certainly do now. But we need to see the audited accounts. And obviously, you know, there needs to be a thorough investigation about this. This is what I said in the previous video that I made at the rear of the Russian ambassador's private residence, where Andrei Cullen is now. So until we actually have that, there is nothing absolutely conclusive, but there is conclusive evidence, without shred of a doubt, that UKIP most definitely did seek Russian funding. And Liz Jones did broker meetings between Ambassador Yakovenko and Aaron Banks, and Nigel Farage lied about meeting Ambassador Yakovenko, and Aaron Banks also lied about the number of times he'd met Ambassador Yakovenko. So there's not an awful lot of honesty going around, is there, from the Farage group is. But that's nothing new. I guess you could say their entire line on Brexit was nothing but a fairy tale or a unicorn, because it never happened. There is no Brexit. There is only Brino, Brexit in name only. And Farage will never deliver complete Brexit. That's another catchphrase he borrowed from me while smearing me repeatedly. But yes, back to a Westminster spying. It did exist, but it was on a much smaller scale than what Peter Jukes and Cadwalladr claim. Although that said, you know, the vast majority of people on the periphery of it were simply sources, many of them just unwitting sources, quite frankly, to try and portray people as agents or double agents, etc. Some people were, absolutely no doubt about it. I played both sides in actual fact, purely for survival. I've nothing to conceal. I don't feel embarrassed about anything. I'm certainly not ashamed. It is just fact. This is the way it is. I'm nothing to gain from misleading anybody. Nobody's paying me anything, and I never received one penny from the Russian Federation, nor did I actually ask them for one penny. So, yes, the Westminster spy ring did exist. Sergey Nalobin most definitely was not the master spy. That is a very serious misnomer. And it's something that they should correct. I actually wrote to the Citizens podcast and told them the truth and that they should correct it. But obviously, they're just too deeply enmeshed in their single narrative now to row back on it. And that's fair enough. But, you know, I have to give my own opinion, supplemented with facts-based evidence as to what I perceived at that time. And yes, the Westminster spy ring did exist. I was involved in it, and but the vast majority of people in it were not spies. They were just unwitting sources, and some of them knew they were sources and played the game. And that's the way it is. And Sergey Nalobin, of course, was rumbled, and Anderson Batin obviously reported what she knew back to the Foreign Office, and he was expelled. He told me they believed it was for espionage, although the official story was that his visa had expired, which is yet another false and misleading narrative. Or, shall we say, an HM government information operation to counter a Russian information operation.